As Nkechi stood at the altar, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, she could feel the eyes of everyone on her. With a single press of a button, the truth exploded through the church speakers, Chukwudi's lies, his manipulation, and his betrayal exposed for all to hear. In that moment, she chose herself, and everything she had ever known shattered. Now let's dive right back into the story. Welcome back, my amazing family and friends. If you're someone who loves stories that tug at your heart and leave you thinking about them for days, do me a favor, smash that subscribe button right now, and don't forget to drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from you. Trust me, you won't want to miss tomorrow's story. It's going to be another powerful one. Let's jump right in. The day before her wedding, Nkechi stood in front of the mirror in the modest yet elegant home she had shared with her mother and father. The soft golden light of the late afternoon streamed in from the window, casting a gentle glow across the room. Her reflection, a young woman in the prime of life, seemed to shimmer, a mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling in her eyes. At 28, she was about to marry Chukwudi, her first and only love, who had promised her a life of happiness and joy. The thought of walking down the aisle tomorrow to his waiting arms filled her with a warm sense of hope. But as she adjusted the strap of her dress, a deep gnawing feeling settled in her stomach. Something was missing. It was as though the universe had whispered in her ear, an unwelcome warning she couldn't quite shake off. Was it the subtle hesitations in Chukwudi's words during their wedding preparations? Or was it the growing distance between them as the wedding day approached? Nkechi ran her fingers through her hair, trying to quell the rising storm of doubts in her chest. She shook her head, chastising herself. She was about to marry the man of her dreams. Wasn't this what she had always wanted? Tomorrow will be perfect, she whispered to herself, her voice thick with the weight of the promises she had made to herself, to Chukwudi, and to their families. She couldn't afford to let her insecurities ruin what had been a perfect courtship. But even as she reassured herself, her cousin Adaizi's words echoed in her mind. Adaizi had always been the free spirit, the adventurous one, the one who constantly questioned things. It was Adaizi who had suggested that she surprise Chukwudi tonight, the night before the wedding. A surprise, Adaizi had said, would add an element of fun to the impending nuptials. They hadn't been alone in a while, and it would be good for her to show her love in a spontaneous way. Surprise him, Nkechi. Maybe you'll catch him in a moment of honesty, Adaizi had urged. Nkechi had laughed off the suggestion at first. But now, standing alone in the quiet of her room, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to dispel any lingering doubts. She grabbed her bag, filled with the small gift she had carefully selected for Chukwudi, a hand-carved figurine of a couple in love, something that spoke to the future she envisioned. It was a simple gift, yet one that symbolized her affection. She wanted to give it to him in person, in the quiet, intimate space of his hotel room, to remind him of the promises they had made. With a deep breath, she called a taxi, determined to put her doubts aside and surprise her fiancé with something special before the big day. Meanwhile, across town, in the upscale hotel where Chukwudi was staying, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The bright lights of Enugu's bustling streets filtered through the window, casting harsh shadows across the room. Inside, Chukwudi leaned against the window, his thoughts far away from the celebration of tomorrow. His sharp eyes, focused on something in the distance, reflected the anxiety he had been battling for weeks. The weight of the situation was heavy, far heavier than he had anticipated. For months, he had been going through the motions, convincing himself that marrying Nkechi would bring stability. Not just for him, but for his business. The baby, still growing in her belly, was a catalyst, an unexpected twist in his carefully crafted plans. His mind wandered back to the last conversation he had with his closest confidant. "Are you sure about this, Chukwudi?" his friend Emeka had asked him just 2 days ago. "You're not really in love with her, are you? This is just convenient." Chukwudi had waved him off, brushing off the comment as a misunderstanding. He wasn't about to let anyone ruin the plans that had taken years to construct. His business, his future, everything depended on this wedding. He needed this, needed her. He glanced at the clock. It was almost time. The door to the hotel room creaked open, and Ifeoma entered, her presence lighting up the space in a way that was completely different from the tension that had clouded it. Ifeoma was everything his fiancée was not: bold, independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. "I hope you're not nervous," Ifeoma teased, brushing her long hair over her shoulder as she walked in. "Do you think I'd be nervous? Tomorrow is the biggest day of my life," Chukwudi replied. Though his words were far from reassuring, he was trying to maintain his composure, but inside, the storm of emotions raged. He watched Ifeoma settle into the chair beside the window, her eyes scanning the room as if she were looking for something. "I'm sure Nkechi will be fine," Ifeoma said, her voice softer now. "You know, she's only getting married because of the baby." Chukwudi's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't know that." "No, she doesn't," Ifeoma said with a sigh, her lips curling into a smirk. "But you'll make sure she knows her place once you marry her. She's only useful for the baby. You don't owe her anything more than that." Chukwudi nodded, though the bitterness in the air made him feel uneasy. "But you'll be in control, right? After the wedding, it's all about keeping her in check. You're going to make sure she never forgets that." The words lingered in the air, cutting through the silence like a blade. As Ifeoma spoke, a shiver ran down Chukwudi's spine. He didn't like the way she said it, so casually, as though the emotional manipulation of the woman he was about to marry was something he had already accepted as part of the plan. But deep down, something inside him stirred, some part of him that had been quieted by ambition and pride for so long. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was the realization that this was all going to fall apart one day, and the truth would always find a way to rise to the surface. Nkechi arrived at the hotel, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected the night to be full of joy, but now, as she stood outside Chukwudi's room, her pulse quickened, and the familiar feeling of doubt gnawed at her once again. With each step she took, the fear of what she might discover crept into her thoughts. The thought of catching Chukwudi in the act of something he shouldn't be doing felt like it would shatter her. Yet, despite her fears, she couldn't shake the urge to confront the truth head-on. After all, this was her life, her future. She had a right to know. She walked up to the front desk and smiled nervously at the receptionist. "I'm here to see Chukwudi Obi," she said, her voice steady but laced with an underlying tremor. The receptionist gave her a polite smile before typing into the computer. "He's in room 305, ma'am. Enjoy your visit." The elevator ride was brief, but it felt like an eternity. Each floor she passed was a step closer to the truth. When she reached room 305, she stood outside the door for a moment, her heart racing. She could hear muffled voices from within. Nkechi's hand reached for the handle, and for a brief moment she considered turning back. But then she steeled herself, taking a deep breath before slowly turning the knob. What she heard next would change everything. The hotel room was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft rustling of sheets. Nkechi's heart raced in her chest, and her hand trembled as she stood outside the door to room 305. She had prepared herself for anything except what she was about to hear. The faint murmur of voices came through the crack in the door. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone of the conversation was unmistakable. Intimate, private, and far too personal for her to ignore. Slowly she pressed her ear against the door, her pulse pounding in her ears, hoping for a sign that she was simply overthinking. But as the voices became clearer, a sickening realization began to settle in her stomach. "Look, I'm only doing this because of the baby, Ifeoma." Chukwudi's voice sounded louder now, betraying the calm facade he always wore. "Once the wedding is over, I'll be in control. She'll fall in line. You know she's too naive to realize it." Nkechi's breath caught in her throat. She staggered back from the door, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had just cracked wide open. Her mind scrambled for meaning, but the words she had just heard were clear. Chukwudi wasn't marrying her because he loved her. He was marrying her because of the baby. Because he could manipulate her and use her as a pawn to secure his future. "I know," Ifeoma's voice responded, smooth and seductive, full of quiet satisfaction. "She'll never question you, Chukwudi. She's already blinded by love. Once you're married, you'll have everything you've ever wanted. You'll have her, the baby, the business, everything." Nkechi's knees buckled, and she steadied herself against the wall of the hallway. It was as though the air had been knocked out of her. She could hardly breathe. She wanted to scream, to confront Chukwudi, to confront Ifeoma, but her body froze, and her mind raced with disbelief. After the wedding, Chukwudi continued, his voice full of arrogance and entitlement, "I'll put her in her place. She'll learn to respect me. I'll keep her in line, just like I always do. She'll never have the power to make decisions. The baby is all that matters, and I'll make sure she knows her place." At that moment, Nkechi's world came crashing down around her. Everything she had believed about Chukwudi, the man she was about to marry, the father of her child, was a lie. The love they had shared, the dreams of a family together, were nothing more than a convenient facade for him to take control. He wasn't her partner. He was a man who had manipulated her for his own gain. Nkechi's heart ached with a mixture of betrayal, shock, and profound sadness. But beneath the sorrow, a flame began to ignite inside her, one of anger, determination, and a fierce resolve. This was her life, her future, and Chukwudi was about to lose everything he thought he could control. The door to room 305 creaked open slightly, and Nkechi's breath hitched as she heard Chukwudi's footsteps. He was coming closer. She quickly backed away, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he would hear it. She moved further down the hallway, her eyes darting around, searching for a place to hide. There were no hiding places, no way to escape what had just happened. She hurried into a nearby stairwell and pressed herself against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind spun in circles, processing the betrayal she had just witnessed. It was as though the ground had been pulled from under her and she was falling, lost in a storm of emotions. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a Daisy. "Have you surprised him yet?" A Daisy's message read, "I'm sure he'll be thrilled." Nkechi didn't respond immediately. Her hand trembled as she stared at the message, the words mocking her in their ignorance. Adaeze had no idea what was happening. She had no idea what Chukwudi had just revealed about his true intentions. But Nkechi knew. She knew exactly what she had to do. This wasn't a marriage built on love. This wasn't a relationship founded on trust or mutual respect. This was a power struggle, a game for control, and she was the pawn. Nkechi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle in her chest. She couldn't confront him, not yet. She needed to plan, to strategize, to make sure that when she acted, it would be a blow he would never recover from. If he thought she was weak, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. With shaking hands, she called her uncle, Chief Ndukwe, her father's brother, a man known for his influence and wealth. He had always been a strong presence in her life, a protector, and now more than ever she needed his support. "Uncle Ndukwe," Nkechi began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her, "I need you to pull your investment from Chukwudi's business. I'm not marrying him tomorrow. I can't. He's been lying to me. I need you to act fast." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Chief Ndukwe had always been protective of his niece, but he had also trusted Chukwudi. He had seen potential in the young man, which was why he had invested in his business in the first place. "Are you sure, Nkechi?" he finally asked, his voice full of concern. "This is a serious matter. What's going on?" "I can't explain everything right now, Uncle," Nkechi said, her voice trembling for a split second before she regained her composure. "But I need you to trust me. I will explain everything when the time is right. Please, pull your investment. It's the only way." After another brief silence, Chief Ndukwe finally agreed. "I will make the necessary arrangements. You have my word, Nkechi. Whatever you need." Nkechi hung up the phone, her heart pounding with the weight of her decision. She wasn't just about to call off the wedding, she was about to destroy everything Chukwudi had worked for. His business, his reputation, his life as he knew it. She looked at her phone again, this time dialing her lawyer's number. When the line connected, she spoke quickly, making arrangements to cancel the marriage license. No one would marry Chukwudi tomorrow. No one would let him continue to manipulate her, or anyone else, ever again. Nkechi spent the rest of the night in her room, her mind racing as she worked out the details of her revenge. She wasn't going to let Chukwudi think he could control her. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. The wedding was a sham, and the truth needed to be exposed. The next morning, as the sun rose over Enugu, Nkechi prepared herself for the most important moment of her life. She would be calm, composed, and resolute. She would walk down that aisle, not as a bride, but as a woman reclaiming her dignity. Her heart was heavy with the knowledge of what was about to unfold, but she knew it was the only way. No more lies. No more manipulation. She would show Chukwudi exactly who he was dealing with. The morning came slowly, the quiet hum of the city outside her window, a stark contrast to the raging storm inside her mind. Nkechi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion, anger, and hurt. She couldn't stop replaying the scene from last night over and over again, as if hearing Chukwudi's betrayal one more time would somehow make it less real. But it didn't. The truth of it crushed her, suffocated her, and yet, as much as she wanted to scream or break down in tears, something inside her refused to let go of her composure. She sat up slowly, the cool morning light casting long shadows across the room. She stared at her phone, the screen still showing the recording of Chukwudi and Ifeoma's conversation. The words they had spoken, the coldness, the selfishness, echoed in her mind. Once we're married, I'll put her in her place. She'll fall in line. She's only useful for the baby. How could she have been so blind? How could she have trusted him with her heart, her future, her family? The thought of walking down the aisle tomorrow and saying vows to a man who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end made her stomach churn. But there was no time to dwell in self-pity. There was too much at stake now. Nkechi pulled herself out of bed, her body heavy, her mind still racing. The weight of the decision ahead felt unbearable. She couldn't simply call off the wedding. That would be too easy, too simple. No. She needed to make Chukwudi understand the consequences of his actions. She needed to show him that he couldn't manipulate her, couldn't control her, couldn't make her feel small anymore. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Adaise. "Where are you, girl? It's almost time. You can't back out now. We've got everything ready." The message hit her like a slap in the face. Adaise, her cousin, the one who had encouraged her to go to Chukwudi's hotel in the first place. She was so blind to the situation, so invested in the wedding, she had no idea what had happened the night before. Nkechi stared at the message, her finger hovering over the screen. She wanted to tell Adaise everything, to expose the truth. But she knew that would change nothing. Adaise wouldn't believe her. She had seen the way Adaise looked at Chukwudi, admiring, almost worshipful. No, there was no room for explanations right now. Nkechi had to focus. She had a plan, and it was time to execute it. As she moved around her room, gathering the few things she would need for the day, her thoughts turned inward. Could she really go through with this? Could she stand in front of all their friends and family and expose everything? Could she tear down the life they had all believed in for the sake of her dignity? There were moments when the weight of it all seemed too much. She thought of her parents, how disappointed they would be. They had always trusted Chukwudi, had always seen him as the perfect match for their daughter. Her mother had been counting the days until her daughter was officially married, her dreams of a perfect family about to come true. But Nkechi knew that her mother would understand. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about her future. It was about her self-worth. If she allowed Chukwudi to continue controlling her, to continue manipulating her, then she would never be free. She would never be the woman she was meant to be. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, dialing her lawyer's number. The call went through, and after a few moments, the lawyer's voice came through the receiver. "Yes, Nkechi, what can I do for you?" "I need you to cancel the marriage license," she said, her voice steady, though inside she felt her emotions stirring again. "Chukwudi is not who I thought he was. I'm not marrying him." There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Are you sure, Nkechi? This is a serious matter. If you cancel it now, you'll have to start the process all over again, and you'll have to deal with the fallout." "I'm sure," Nkechi replied, her voice unwavering. "Do it. I'll handle everything else." She ended the call with a sense of finality. There was no turning back now. The wedding, the life she had planned, was crumbling around her. But in that moment, she felt free. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't controlled by Chukwudi's lies. She was in control of her own destiny. For a moment, she considered calling Chukwudi, confronting him face to face, telling him that she knew everything, that she knew about Ifeoma, about his plans, about his betrayal. But she quickly dismissed the thought. No. She couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken, of seeing her angry. She wasn't going to give him that power. Instead, she walked over to her bag, pulling out the Bluetooth device she had secretly prepared the night before. It was small, unassuming, but it would do the job. She had spent the hours after hearing his betrayal setting the plan in motion. She had connected the device to the church's sound system earlier in the day, knowing that it would be her final act of defiance. She could already picture the look on Chukwudi's face when the truth came to light. It would be priceless. It would be a reckoning. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her father. "Are you ready for the big day, my daughter? I know you're nervous, but remember we're all so proud of you. We've been waiting for this day for a long time." Nkechi closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She missed her father's warmth, his unwavering belief in her. He had always been her rock, her protector, and now she was about to break his heart. But she couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. She couldn't be part of a family that would accept the cruelty Chukwudi had planned for her. She wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening. "No more," she whispered to herself, "I choose me." As the hour of the wedding approached, Nkechi stood in front of her mirror, the reality of what she was about to do settling in. She wasn't just walking away from a wedding, she was walking away from a life that had been dictated to her by others. A life that she had allowed to be shaped by Chukwudi's lies, her family's expectations, and her own fear of being alone. But now she had nothing to fear. She reached for the bouquet, the one she had prepared for the ceremony, and held it tightly in her hands. The Bluetooth device was hidden inside, a symbol of the power she was about to reclaim. She wasn't walking down the aisle as a bride. She was walking away as a woman of strength. With one last glance at her reflection, she walked out of the room. The wedding venue was a sight to behold. The church, an old but beautifully preserved structure nestled in the heart of Enugu, was adorned with delicate white flowers and golden ribbons. The air inside was heavy with the scent of lilies, and soft instrumental music filled the space, setting the tone for what was supposed to be the most joyous occasion in Nkechi's life. Family and friends filled the pews, their voices soft with excitement and anticipation, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Nkechi stood in the church's small bridal room, her reflection in the full-length mirror a haunting reminder of everything she had almost been, everything she had almost given away. The bridal dress, a flowing white creation designed to make her look like a princess, seemed out of place now. It wasn't a symbol of joy or love. It was a cage. It was a reminder of the future Chukwudi had tried to trap her in, a future where she would be controlled, manipulated, and ultimately broken. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Adaeze again, this time calling, "Where are you, Nkechi?" Adaeze's voice was laced with excitement. "Everyone is waiting. Chukwudi is already at the altar. It's almost time for you to walk down the aisle." Nkechi hesitated before answering. The sound of her cousin's voice, so full of anticipation and joy, grated on her nerves. Adaeze had no idea what was happening, no idea what she had discovered about Chukwudi and Ifeoma. "I'm getting ready, Adaeze," she said, her voice calm but distant. "I'll be there soon." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by an excited chuckle. "Don't be nervous, girl. Everything's going to be perfect. I can't wait for the ceremony." Perfect. The word echoed in Nkechi's mind, and for a moment she almost believed it. But then she reminded herself of the truth. There was no perfection in what was about to happen. What was perfect was a lie. She would not walk down that aisle as a naive bride. She would walk away as a woman who had reclaimed her power. Nkechi put her phone down, her fingers lingering on the screen for a moment before swiping it off. She was done pretending, done with playing the part of the perfect bride. She would be the woman who exposed the truth. As she stepped out of the bridal room, her heart pounded in her chest. Every step she took down the narrow hallway seemed like an eternity. She could hear the murmurs of the guests, the soft laughter, the clinking of glasses. Everything was perfect on the surface. But under that thin veneer of joy, there was a tension in the air, palpable and suffocating. At the end of the hallway, the grand doors to the church stood open, and beyond them she could see Chukwudi, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, waiting at the altar. His back was straight, his posture regal, a man confident in the knowledge that today would be his victory. But as her gaze met his from across the room, she felt something shift. The calm in his eyes, the smile he wore for the guests, he had no idea what was coming. She moved forward, her feet light despite the weight on her heart. She had made her decision. She would not walk down the aisle as his bride. She would walk away as the woman who chose herself. But as she reached the threshold of the church, her breath caught in her throat. There, standing at Chukwudi's side, was Adaeze. The sight of her cousin, so brightly dressed in her own white gown, so familiar and yet so out of place, made Nkechi's stomach churn. The momentary flash of realization hit her like a punch. Adaeze was the other woman. Nkechi's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she watched Adaeze's laugh. How could she have not known? How could she have been so blind? Adaeze had always been there, always by her side, offering her advice, supporting her as she prepared for the wedding. She had been the one to suggest the surprise visit to Chukwudi's hotel to keep the excitement alive. All the while she had been betraying her own cousin, sleeping with the man Nkechi was about to marry. Nkechi felt the rage bubbling up inside her, threatening to consume her, but she kept her composure, forcing her face to remain neutral, calm. There would be no confrontation, not yet. No, this moment wasn't for that. This was for something bigger. This was her time to take control. As she stood there, hidden in the doorway, she could see the guests settling into their seats. Her heart pounded, each beat sending a shockwave through her body. Chukwudi stood at the altar, his back to her, talking to a few friends, oblivious to the truth. Adaeze was talking to some of the bridesmaids, her back turned towards her. Neither of them knew she was standing there, watching them, her thoughts swirling like a tempest. For a moment, Nkechi considered turning and walking away. The room felt stifling, her every breath heavy with the realization of what had to happen next. She could feel her pulse in her ears, could feel the weight of the lies she was about to expose, pressing down on her chest. Her plan was simple: expose Chukwudi, expose Adaeze, and walk away with her dignity intact. But for that to happen, she would have to confront them both. The sound of the organ played softly in the distance, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. Nkechi took one last deep breath and stepped forward, her heart steady, her mind clear. It was time. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes fixed ahead on Chukwudi, who was now facing her, his smile wide and proud. For a moment, their eyes locked, and in that instant, everything she had planned seemed to blur. She wanted to scream, to accuse him right then and there, to tell him that she knew everything, that he would never control her again. But she didn't. Instead, she held her head high, walking with a calm, collected grace. She had planned everything to perfection. The truth would come out. Not now, but soon. When she reached the altar, she stood in front of him, the silence between them deafening. The guests were watching, the air thick with anticipation. Chukwudi smiled, but his smile faltered when he noticed the coldness in her eyes, the absence of the joy he had expected. "What's wrong, Nkechi?" he whispered, his voice low but laced with concern. "You look distant." Nkechi didn't answer. Instead, she slowly, almost deliberately, placed her bouquet of flowers on the altar beside her. The Bluetooth device, hidden inside, was now connected to the church's sound system. She could feel the device in her palm, hidden from view, waiting for the perfect moment. "Nothing's wrong," she finally replied, her voice steady but her words sharp. "Everything's perfect, but you should know something, Chukwudi." He blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Just wait and you'll find out," she said, her voice low but filled with quiet intensity. The tension in the room heightened, and Chukwudi's confusion deepened. The priest, who had been waiting patiently for the ceremony to begin, stepped forward, but there was an uncomfortable silence. Nkechi's gaze never left Chukwudi's, her thoughts racing. This was the beginning. This was where it all started. The church was a sea of murmurs as the priest, sensing the tension in the air, cleared his throat and prepared to begin the ceremony. Chukwudi still stood there, confusion flickering in his eyes, while Nkechi's calm, almost eerie composure only deepened the mystery of the moment. It wasn't the love-filled gaze he expected, it was a steady, cool resolve that left him wondering if something was truly wrong. His mind, still clouded by arrogance, couldn't fathom what was coming. But Nkechi had no intention of starting the wedding in the way anyone expected. No, her mind was elsewhere in the past, where all the pieces of her life, her choices and her relationships fit together, like a puzzle she was finally seeing for the first time. As she stood there, her gaze never leaving Chukwudi, her thoughts drifted to her childhood. She had always been a dreamer, a girl raised in the warmth of a close-knit family in Enugu, where community and tradition meant everything. Her father, a proud man of honor, had built his life around hard work and integrity. He had often told her, "Never let anyone take your dignity, Nkechi. It is the one thing they cannot take from you unless you give it to them." Her father's words echoed in her mind as she looked at the man standing before her. Chukwudi had never been the man her father had imagined for her. He had been charming, yes, but there was always something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, that she had ignored. There had been little moments that hinted at his true nature, but she had convinced herself they were just moments of insecurity. A harsh word here, a dismissive glance there, but she had always brushed them off. She had convinced herself that he loved her, that their future was secure. It wasn't until she became pregnant that she truly understood what Chukwudi saw in her. She wasn't the woman he desired. She wasn't the woman he loved. She was the vessel for his ambitions. And that realization came in fragments, pieces that now fit together perfectly in her mind, like shards of glass cutting through her heart. Her thoughts drifted back to a time not long before, when everything seemed to fall into place for the first time. She had been sitting in her mother's kitchen, discussing her upcoming wedding. The joy in her mother's voice had been undeniable, but there was an underlying concern she couldn't hide. "You know, Nkechi," her mother had said, her voice soft, "no man is perfect, but you and Chukwudi, you have something special. I can see it." Nkechi had smiled, nodding. But her mother's words had stuck with her. There was a wisdom in those words, a quiet caution she had ignored. Her mother wasn't wrong. No man was perfect, but Nkechi had believed in their love so much that she overlooked the cracks. She ignored the moments when Chukwudi seemed more interested in what she could do for him rather than who she was as a person. And then came the day Chukwudi had dropped the bombshell, the day she had learned he was only marrying her because of the baby. That moment felt like a slap to the face, a revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew about her life and her future. The truth was out. He had used her. She was just the means to his end. Nkechi's thoughts shifted to Ifeoma, the other woman in this tangled mess. Ifeoma had always been around, but she had never suspected the depth of their involvement. There had always been a closeness between Chukwudi and Ifeoma. Too close, too comfortable. But it was the way Ifeoma had whispered to her, the way she'd smiled that one night at a family gathering, that made Nkechi pause. Had she seen something in Ifeoma's eyes then? Had she ignored the signs? It wasn't until last night, when she had overheard their conversation, that the truth became undeniable. Ifeoma wasn't just a passing fling, as Chukwudi had tried to make her believe. She was a central part of his plan. They had been playing her all along, using her as a stepping stone to secure their future, while she had been too blind to see it. Nkechi could still hear Ifeoma's voice in her mind, smooth and cold, as she agreed with Chukwudi's plan. "She'll never question you. She's blinded by love." Nkechi's heart twisted as she remembered the words, "She's blinded by love." That was what they both thought of her, nothing more than a naive woman who could be controlled. She was a pawn in their game, their path to the future. The thought of Ifeoma, her own cousin, being the one who had kept Chukwudi's secret, who had helped him weave this web of deceit, burned like acid in her veins. But Nkechi knew that this was bigger than her hurt. This was about reclaiming herself, about exposing the lies that had nearly cost her everything. She glanced at the priest, who was standing at the altar, waiting for the ceremony to begin. His expression was one of quiet patience, but there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition perhaps, of the tension in the room. He had no idea what was happening. None of them did. But in that moment, as she looked around at the guests who were smiling and whispering, Nkechi knew it was time. Her fingers brushed against the bouquet in her hands, the hidden Bluetooth device securely tucked inside. Her mind was made up. Chukwudi and Ifeoma would pay for what they had done to her. They would see the consequences of their actions, and they would understand that there were limits to how far manipulation could go. As her gaze swept the room, she saw familiar faces, her parents, her uncles, her friends, all of them excited for what they believed would be the happiest day of her life. But she wasn't there for their approval anymore. She wasn't there to please anyone. She was there to make a statement, to show the world that she had the strength to walk away from the life she had been handed, the life she thought she had to accept. Her mind snapped back to the present as Chukwudi's eyes locked onto hers, his smile faltering when he saw the emptiness in her gaze. The crowd quieted, sensing something was amiss. The wedding was not proceeding as planned. The air thickened with anticipation, and for a fleeting moment she could see the first crack of doubt in Chukwudi's expression. It was now or never. Nkechi took one last deep breath and walked toward the altar. Chukwudi stood there, waiting, unaware that his world was about to be upended. She moved with purpose, her steps steady, her heart resolute. Just as she reached the altar, she placed her bouquet down gently, the device inside pressing against the soft petals. She felt a wave of calm wash over her as she prepared to execute her plan. The guests watched, confused by her actions, but it was too late. She had already taken control. With a subtle press of a button, the recording of Chukwudi and Ifeoma's betrayal began to play through the church's speakers, slowly, deliberately, making sure every word, every whisper was heard. The soft hum of the church's sound system filled the room, and for a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The words began slowly, like a creeping tide, building in intensity as the voice on the recording echoed through the church, unearthing the truth that Chukwudi had spent so long burying. "Look, I'm only doing this because of the baby, Ifeoma." Chukwudi's voice was clear, unmistakable, each word cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. The guests gasped in shock, their heads swiveling from one another to Chukwudi and back, unsure of what they were hearing. Whispers began to ripple through the congregation, but the man standing at the altar, the man who had once been so confident and poised, stood frozen, his face draining of color. His lips parted in disbelief, but no words came out. Nkechi stood still, her gaze fixed on him, unwavering. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the shock spreading like wildfire, but none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the sound of his betrayal being laid bare for everyone to hear. The man who had sworn to love her, to cherish her, had reduced her to nothing more than a pawn in his game. "I'll marry her for the baby," Chukwudi's voice continued, his tone condescending, laced with arrogance. "She's just a means to an end. Once I've secured the baby, I'll put her in her place. She'll never question me. She'll fall in line. She has no choice." The words seemed to hang in the air like a dark cloud, thick and suffocating. In that moment, it felt like time had stopped for Nkechi. She could feel the pulse of betrayal running through her veins, the weight of the years they had spent together, now crumbling away in the face of his lies. It was as though her entire future had just been erased, and in its place, a raw, unyielding truth stood tall. Chukwudi had never loved her. He had only loved the control he could exert over her, the power she gave him. She didn't need to look at the crowd to know the magnitude of what was unfolding. The church, once full of excitement and joy, was now a room heavy with shock and disbelief. But none of that could compare to the emotions churning within her. A mixture of grief, anger, and a sense of liberation washed over her. She had taken control of her own fate. She had exposed the truth. As the final words of the recording echoed in the church, silence fell. Chukwudi stood rooted to the spot, his eyes wide, his face pale. His mouth moved as though he were about to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, he was lost in a sea of his own guilt. His entire plan had unraveled in a matter of seconds. The control he had once thought he wielded so effortlessly was slipping through his fingers, and all that remained was the glaring truth. Ifeoma, who had been standing by the side of the altar, her face a picture of smug satisfaction just moments ago, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. She froze, her hands trembling slightly, as her gaze flicked nervously from Chukwudi to the shocked faces of the guests. Nkechi's gaze met Ifeoma's, and in that moment, everything became clear. The woman who had once been her confidant, her cousin, had been the architect of her own destruction. It was Ifeoma who had whispered in her ear, urging her to surprise Chukwudi. It was Ifeoma who had kept Chukwudi's secret for so long. She had been complicit in the betrayal just as much as he had. Nkechi took a step forward, her eyes locked on both of them, Chukwudi and Ifeoma. There was no fear in her anymore, no hesitation. She was done with their lies, done with their manipulation. "Is this what you wanted, Chukwudi?" she said, her voice steady and full of quiet strength. "Is this the future you planned for us? To control me, to treat me like I'm nothing but a tool for your ambitions?" Chukwudi's eyes darted around the room, his expression desperate, but the truth was already out. There was no way to take it back. There was no way to escape it. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. And then Chukwudi's mother, who had been sitting in the front row with a proud smile, stood up abruptly. Her face was a mask of disbelief and fury as she turned to her son, her voice shaking with anger. "Chukwudi, what have you done?" she cried out, her voice breaking with the weight of the betrayal. How could you do this to her? She's your future. She's the mother of your child." Her words hit Chukwudi like a slap, but instead of responding, he simply lowered his head, unable to meet his mother's gaze. His mother's voice cracked as she turned towards the guests, her eyes searching for some sign of understanding, some way to reconcile the man she had raised with the monster he had become. The guests were whispering amongst themselves, their eyes flicking between Chukwudi, Ifeoma, and Nkechi as the weight of the moment settled in. The tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't just the betrayal of a woman by her fiancé, it was the shattering of an entire life, an entire future that had been built on lies. The dreams of a perfect marriage, of a life together, were now nothing but dust. Ifeoma, her face flushed with shame, tried to slip away, but before she could take a step, a group of women from the church, members of Nkechi's family, stepped forward and blocked her path. One of them, Nkechi's aunt, spoke in a voice full of authority. "You think you can just walk away from this?" she said, her voice sharp with contempt. "You think you can ruin this family and not face the consequences?" Ifeoma opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She tried to push past them, but the women closed ranks, trapping her in the aisle. The once confident woman who had so easily betrayed her cousin now stood there, her head bowed, defeated. As Chukwudi's mother began to shout at him, demanding answers, Nkechi stepped forward. She wasn't angry anymore. She was beyond anger. She was no longer the woman who had walked into that church a few hours ago, filled with hope and dreams. She was someone else now, someone stronger, someone who had found her voice in the most painful way possible. She raised her hand for silence, and the room grew quiet. "I've made my choice," Nkechi said, her voice carrying with the quiet power of someone who had come into their own. "I choose me. I choose my dignity. I will not be part of this lie anymore." Her words hung in the air, a final declaration that shattered the last vestiges of the life she had once known. She turned to Chukwudi, her gaze hardening. "You thought you could control me, manipulate me, make me your puppet. But I'm done. I am walking away from this and from you. You don't deserve me. And you never did." The sound of applause filled the church as Nkechi turned and walked towards the exit. The guests, stunned into silence just moments ago, now cheered her on, their support an overwhelming affirmation of the strength she had found within herself. As Nkechi walked away from the altar, her steps deliberate, each one carrying the weight of a future she was finally claiming for herself, a chilling silence filled the church. It was as though the entire world had paused to take in the shock of what had just happened. The guests, once caught up in the excitement of a wedding celebration, now sat frozen, their gazes fixed on the woman walking out of the life they had all imagined for her. Chukwudi, still standing at the altar, his jaw clenched, stared after her, his world crumbling around him. The sounds of his mother's frantic voice, her pleas for him to explain, barely registered in his ears. He felt the walls closing in on him, the weight of every lie he had ever told pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. It had been a lie, all of it. His ambition, his plans, his manipulations. They had all been for nothing. For the first time, Chukwudi felt something he had never experienced before: shame. He turned to look at Ifeoma, who was now standing awkwardly, her hands trembling at her sides. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. She had thought that once the wedding went ahead, everything would fall into place. She would have Chukwudi, she would have control, and life would move forward as planned. But now, as she stood there, her face flushed with humiliation, the realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had played a part in destroying everything. She had been so eager to take what she thought was rightfully hers that she didn't see the disaster she was walking into. Her eyes shifted around the room, but there was no escape from the stares, the whispers. The guilt was too heavy. She had not just betrayed her cousin. She had betrayed herself. "Please," Chukwudi muttered, his voice hoarse as he turned to face his mother. "I didn't mean for this to happen. You have to understand. It wasn't supposed to end like this." His mother, who had always been his pillar, stood motionless, her eyes wide with shock and disgust. She took a step back, as though recoiling from the man her son had become. "Do you think that's enough?" she spat, her voice shaking with fury. "You have no idea what you've done, Chukwudi. No idea at all. You think you can just play with people's lives and walk away when it's convenient? Look at you. Look at what you've become." Her words hit him harder than any physical blow. He had always known that his mother expected greatness from him, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't just about business or status, it was about honor, about family. And he had betrayed both. "Chukwudi," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, "how could you do this to her? To your family?" But Chukwudi, overwhelmed by guilt and panic, barely heard her. His world was spinning out of control. The foundation he had built his entire life on, the lies, the manipulation, the control, had crumbled in an instant. And now, standing in front of the people who once respected him, he felt smaller than ever. Ifeoma stood beside him, her body rigid, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had been waiting for this moment, believing that once Chukwudi and Nkechi were married, she would have everything she desired. The life she had imagined was slipping through her fingers faster than she could grasp it. She looked around, and her heart sank. The women in the congregation, who had once admired her for her beauty and charm, now looked at her with disdain. Their judgment was palpable. Her mouth went dry as she caught the eyes of Nkechi's relatives, who had slowly begun to approach her. They didn't say anything, but their eyes spoke volumes. "You think you can just walk away from this?" One of the older women, Nkechi's aunt, asked, her voice icy with contempt. "You think you can tear a family apart and just leave?" Ifeoma opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. She had no defense. There was nothing she could say to make this right. The guilt and shame that had been growing inside her now consumed her, and she realized the weight of her actions. She wasn't just a mistress. She was the reason for this destruction. It was her lies, her selfishness, that had made this moment inevitable. "I didn't mean for it to go like this," Ifeoma finally said. But the words fell flat. There was no sympathy in her voice, no apology that could undo the damage. She tried to move past the women blocking her way, but they wouldn't let her. "Stay," one of them said, "and face what you've done." And for the first time, Ifeoma couldn't look them in the eye. She had no choice but to stand there, humiliated and defeated, as the reality of what she had done slowly sank in. The priest, still trying to make sense of the chaos, now stepped forward, his face drawn with confusion and sorrow. I think it would be best if we ended this ceremony here," he said, his voice faltering. It wasn't just the guests who were watching now. The church had become a stage for Chukwudi's downfall, and there was no escaping it. His own family, the ones who had supported him, now turned their backs. His reputation, his future, his entire world was crumbling in front of his eyes. But it wasn't just about the marriage. It wasn't just about the woman he had betrayed. It was about him, about the man he had become. Chukwudi had never expected this. He had always prided himself on being in control, on knowing exactly what to say and do. But now, standing there, with his world crashing down around him, he realized how hollow his life had truly been. Nkechi's voice, steady and firm, reached him again. "You think you can control me, Chukwudi? You thought you could trap me, but you were wrong. This isn't just about you, it's about me, and I will never let you take my power." Her words were like a dagger to his heart, but this time there was no escaping the truth. He had no power over her, not anymore. Chukwudi stumbled back, his hands reaching out as if trying to grasp onto something, anything. But the truth had already exposed him for what he truly was. A man who had used everyone around him for his own selfish gain. The man who had claimed to love her was nothing more than a liar. In the midst of the chaos, Chukwudi's mother, unable to contain her emotions, collapsed into the arms of a family member, sobbing uncontrollably. The woman who had once been so proud of her son, now overwhelmed by shame, clung to the support of those around her, her body racked with tears. Chukwudi, still reeling from the weight of the exposure, turned away from the altar, his steps unsteady. The man who had once commanded a room, who had once been the center of attention, now found himself insignificant. He was nothing but a man undone by his own choices. Ifeoma, watching from the side, realized the enormity of what had happened. She had lost Chukwudi, her future, and her self-respect in a single devastating moment. There was no future for her in this church. There was no place for someone who had destroyed a family for her own desires. And as she watched Chukwudi fall apart, she knew she was just as broken. But through it all, one thing remained clear. Nkechi had triumphed. She had exposed the truth, walked away with dignity, and reclaimed her life. As she turned to leave the church, the weight of everything that had happened lifted from her shoulders. The power she had taken back was not just her own. It was a gift for every woman who had ever been betrayed, every woman who had ever been made to feel small, weak, or insignificant. Nkechi had chosen herself. She had taken control of her own destiny. And in that moment, as she stepped out of the church, the world seemed brighter, more open, full of possibilities she had once been too afraid to dream of. The church doors slammed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the air like a thunderclap. The world outside felt like a different place, one where Nkechi was finally free from the shackles of manipulation, from the weight of Chukwudi's betrayal. She stood at the entrance, her back straight, her heart pounding, the remnants of the ceremony still echoing in her mind. But for the first time, the pounding in her chest wasn't from fear. It was from strength. She had done it. She had exposed the truth, walked away from the life she thought she wanted, and now, for the first time, she could breathe. She had chosen herself. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Nkechi stood there, her fingers gripping the edges of the wooden doors, steadying herself. There was no turning back. There never had been. Behind her, the church was filled with chaos. The guests had erupted in shock, some whispering, some trying to make sense of what had just unfolded. Chukwudi's face was red with anger and humiliation, while Ifeoma, her hands trembling, stood at the altar, unsure of what to do next. Chukwudi's mother was still sobbing, clinging to the arm of a family member, her face contorted in disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the perfect wedding day they had all dreamed of. But for Nkechi, the chaos was a distant hum. It was no longer her concern. She had made her choice. As the church bells rang faintly in the background, signaling the end of the ceremony that never was, Nkechi stood alone outside. The cool air on her skin, a stark contrast to the heat inside the church. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking it all in. The silence felt like a blessing, a moment of peace after the storm. But then she heard footsteps approaching, quick and heavy. She turned to find her father, Chief Ugochukwu, rushing toward her, his face a mix of concern and pride. He had always been the pillar of strength in her life, the man who had taught her to stand tall no matter what life threw her way. And now, in the wake of everything that had just happened, he was here, standing before her, his eyes searching for answers. "Nkechi," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. "What have you done?" His words weren't harsh, but they carried the weight of 1,000 questions. He was confused, hurt, and maybe even a little ashamed. The dream he had for his daughter, the future he had imagined for her, had just shattered in front of his eyes. He couldn't understand why she had walked away from everything, why she had exposed Chukwudi's betrayal when she could have just walked away quietly. But Nkechi wasn't afraid to answer him. She was no longer the naive girl who had walked into that church an hour ago, filled with hopes and dreams. She was a woman who had seen the truth and embraced it, no matter the cost. "Daddy," she began, her voice steady and calm. "I did it because I had to. I had to choose myself." Her father's face softened slightly, but the confusion didn't leave his eyes. "But what about the family, the wedding, your future with Chukwudi? All of that, everything we've worked for, what happens now?" Nkechi took a deep breath, her heart heavy but resolute. She had always admired her father's strength, but she had also inherited his sense of pride. And it was that pride, her dignity, that had led her here. "I can't marry a man who sees me as nothing more than a tool," she said, her words cutting through the air with finality. "I can't live a life built on lies. I won't be controlled. I choose to live my life on my own terms, not based on what anyone else wants from me." Her father looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words, trying to understand her decision. His brows furrowed as he searched her face, as if looking for any sign that this wasn't the right choice. But then, after a moment of silence, something shifted in his gaze. "You're my daughter," he said, his voice softening, filled with pride. "And I've always wanted you to be strong. If this is what makes you happy, then I stand with you." The weight that had settled in Nkechi's chest suddenly lifted. Her father's words, though simple, meant the world to her. She had feared that he wouldn't understand, that he would see her decision as a failure, as a rejection of everything they had worked for. But in his eyes, she saw only pride. Pride in her strength, in her decision to choose herself over the life she was expected to live. As her father stepped back, a figure appeared in the distance, Chukwudi. He was walking toward her, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. His once pristine suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled. The man who had stood at the altar moments ago with all the confidence in the world was now a man undone, his pride shattered beyond repair. "Nkechi," he called out, his voice filled with panic, "please, just listen to me." She turned to face him, her body tense, her eyes cold. She had no more words for him. No more explanations. Everything he had done, everything he had said, had led them to this moment. There was no going back. "You've said enough, Chukwudi," Nkechi replied, her voice steady, but her eyes hard as steel. "There's nothing more you can say to me." Chukwudi took a step closer, his eyes pleading, his hands outstretched, but Nkechi didn't move. She had already made her decision, and there was nothing he could do to change it. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've made mistakes, but I can't lose you. I love you, Nkechi. I swear I do. Please don't do this. Don't leave me." For a moment, Nkechi felt a flicker of something, a pang of regret perhaps, but it was quickly extinguished by the weight of her own resolve. She had no time for his apologies, no time for his empty promises. She wasn't the woman who could be manipulated anymore. She wasn't the woman who would live for anyone else's approval. "I'm not your possession, Chukwudi," she said, her voice cold, detached. "You never loved me. You loved the idea of me. You loved the control. But that's over now." And with that, she turned away, walking toward the exit. She didn't look back, not at him, not at anyone. She was free, and nothing could hold her back now. As she walked away, Chukwudi remained rooted to the spot, his hands still outstretched, but he was no longer speaking. He was paralyzed by the weight of his own guilt, his own failure. For the first time in his life, he realized the full extent of his actions, the harm he had caused, the pain he had inflicted. But it was too late. The moment of redemption had passed. He had lost everything. Nkechi's footsteps faded as she walked out of the church, and Chukwudi stood there in the empty silence, his world forever changed. There was no going back. There was no fixing what he had broken. And as he stood in the doorway, alone with his regret, the full weight of his choices crashed down upon him. The world outside the church felt different. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the city of Enugu, as if nature itself were aware of the shift that had taken place. The wedding guests had slowly filtered out of the church, their conversations hushed, whispers carrying the weight of the scandal. Nkechi walked down the steps of the church, her steps steady, yet there was a quiet pride in the way she held herself. The eyes of the world may have been on her in judgment, but she didn't care. She had made the hardest decision of her life, and in the process she had found herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket as she reached the bottom of the steps. It was a message from her mother. "Where are you, Nkechi? Are you okay? Please talk to us." She took a deep breath, looking up at the horizon, the weight of everything still pressing against her chest. But as she looked at the world before her, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. She was free. With a single swipe of her finger, she opened the message and typed, "I'm okay, Mom. I'll explain everything when I get home. I love you." She could feel her heart swelling as she pressed send. Her parents were her rock, and she knew that in time they would understand. They would see that she had made the right decision for herself. The world felt so open now, so full of possibilities, even though she had no idea what was next. She had walked away from the life she had planned, from the man she had thought she would spend her life with. But in doing so, she had found her voice, her strength, and a freedom she hadn't known she was missing. Meanwhile, in the church, Chukwudi stood motionless. His face was a mixture of disbelief and shame, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to lose everything. The truth of his actions, his selfishness, his lies, his manipulation, had been exposed, and there was no escaping it now. He had thought he could control Nkechi, bend her to his will, but now he saw how wrong he was. His mother, still crying in the arms of family members, looked at him with disgust. Her once proud son, the young man she had raised with so much hope, now seemed like a stranger to her. His father had always demanded excellence, but what was excellence when it was built on deceit? Ifeoma stood beside him, her hands clasped in front of her, unable to meet his eyes. The smug confidence she had once carried was gone. She knew there was no way out now. She had betrayed not only Nkechi but herself. She had been complicit in tearing apart a family for her own desires, and now there was no redemption. Chukwudi turned away from the altar, his body heavy with the realization that he had lost not just a woman, but his integrity, his future, and his place in the world. He had never imagined it would end like this. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he checked it, seeing a series of missed calls. His business partners, his lawyer, everyone was trying to reach him. His mind raced as he realized the full extent of what was happening. Chief Ndukwe's call came through next, and when Chukwudi answered, he was met with the harsh, unforgiving voice of the man who had once been his greatest ally. "You have no idea what you've done, do you, Chukwudi?" Chief Ndukwe's voice was cold, filled with the unmistakable tone of disappointment. "I've already pulled my investment from your business. Consider it over. You're done. Your name, everything you've worked for, gone." Chukwudi's world crumbled further with every word. His business, his reputation, everything that had once been so secure was now slipping through his fingers. He sank to the ground, unable to move, unable to speak. All the lies, all the manipulation had led him here, to a point of no return. Nkechi sat in the back of a taxi, the city of Enugu passing by in a blur as she looked out the window. Her mind was still racing, trying to comprehend everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had walked away from the wedding, from the man she had thought she would marry, and in doing so had found the strength to claim her future. The message notification on her phone buzzed again, this time from her friend Esther. "Girl, you are amazing. You showed all of us what it really means to stand up for yourself. I'm so proud of you." The bride who walked. Nkechi couldn't help but smile. The words echoed in her mind. The bride who walked. She hadn't just walked away from a wedding. She had walked away from a life that wasn't meant for her, and in doing so, she had given every woman out there a reason to believe in their own power. As she sat back in the seat, the weight of everything began to lift, and a new sense of clarity took its place. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to let anyone dictate her worth ever again. When she arrived home, her parents were waiting for her. The love and concern in their eyes were evident, but so was the pride. They knew their daughter, they knew her strength, and they knew, above all, that she had made the right choice. "I'm so proud of you, Nkechi," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've shown us all what real courage looks like." Tears welled in Nkechi's eyes as she embraced her father. She had feared this moment, worried that her decision would break her family. But now she knew it had only made them stronger. Nkechi spent the next few weeks reflecting on her journey. She began writing in a journal, pouring her heart out on the pages. She found herself starting a blog, one that she called The Bride Who Walked. A space where she could share her story, connect with other women, and empower them to walk away from toxic relationships and choose themselves, just as she had done. The blog quickly gained traction, with women from all over the country sharing their stories and supporting each other. Nkechi's journey, her courage, became an inspiration, not just for those who had been betrayed, but for anyone who needed to find the strength to stand up for themselves. As the weeks went by, Chukwudi's life continued to unravel. His business, once a symbol of his ambition, was now nothing more than a shell of its former self. His reputation, tarnished beyond repair, kept him isolated from everyone he once knew. The woman he had betrayed, the woman he had manipulated, had not only walked away from him, but had become a symbol of strength and resilience. Ifeoma, too, found herself ostracized, her family turning their backs on her. The social circles that once embraced her now rejected her, and the shame she had brought upon herself was too much to bear. But in the end, the consequences of their actions were theirs alone to bear. Nkechi had walked away with her dignity, her self-respect, and the knowledge that she had made the right decision. And in doing so, she had paved the way for others to do the same. Months later, Nkechi stood in front of a group of women at a conference, speaking about her journey, about the strength it took to leave the man she thought she loved, and about the power of choosing oneself. "I chose myself," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "And you can too. Never let anyone make you feel small. You are worthy of love, respect, and dignity, and if you have to walk away to find it, then walk away. The future is yours." The applause that followed was deafening, and in that moment, Nkechi knew that she had not only healed herself, but had helped heal others. She had taken her pain and turned it into power. She had walked away from a broken dream, and in doing so, she had built a new life, one that was hers and hers alone.